Vast as the Kalahari Desert is, it's unique among the deserts of the world, because it's a desert only in the sense that it has no surface water. Otherwise it supports a rich, diverse and abundant life. And the Bushmen became most inventive in the ways of getting the water. They would sip it out of hollow trees and gather it for future use in ostrich eggshells. Some of the Bushmen's most tender and beautiful myths and stories were connected with rain. And it is said that the spirit who is responsible for the clouds that make rain, would send out two forms of cloud, and one they called a masculine rain. It came in thunder and lightning and released the rain with great force. But the other was tender, pervasive, and consistent like a woman, and fell gently and transformed the desert. Without rain, without water, he could not possibly survive. And so intimate and profound was this relationship between the Bushmen and the rain, that in periods of prolonged drought, he claimed that his women, like the earth, went sterile and could bear no children. In one of the most beautifully orchestrated myths of all, the rain here was a bull. We see this bull depicted even in animals of a gigantic and sometimes supernatural kind, identifiable not as a specific animal necessarily, but definitely a bull. And they say when the need of the earth was greatest, particularly in the period of the people of the early race, when all things were people, and the earth itself was a woman. And this bull would feel the need of the woman, which corresponded to a need of the bull itself. And he would come through the sky, the passion in him flashing in his eyes, which we saw as lightning, and the voice of his command in the thunder. And he would come to the earth and he would take the woman of the earth in his arms, and between them they would procreate and create the earth and all living things of plants and animals and insects upon it. And when he was gone, one could see his retreat in the mist that move across the face of the earth. But the periods of abundance produced by the rain, alas, it didn't last long. We shall see how important in spiritual as well as practical ways the role of the woman was in Bushman life. But their role as gatherers of food during the long dry seasons that followed can hardly be overestimated. They were all superb botanists. Aguaute, Malipai, and Aikama follow the trail until they find a tiny little leaf protruding above the sand. And they proceed to dig out the roots of the most sustaining kinds. The digging stick was to the woman what the bow and arrow was to the man. It's something that she carried with her everywhere she went. Even in the classical days of Stone Age culture in the Rockya interior, the women had a round stone with a hole in it, wherein the digging stick fitted, so that they had extra weight for getting their roots out of the far firmer ground. Here in the desert, of course, digging was much easier. It was amazing the variety of roots of all kinds that went into the fire. The prize seemed to be not her root, but a kind of vegetable that grew on the surface which they called ka, and which is variously known as the gemsbok or the eland cucumber. I myself loved to eat it raw because it had a genuine cucumber flavor. The moisture used on this occasion comes from perhaps the most important of all the roots and tubers of the Kalahari Desert. It's a tuber they call B, and it's the one that never fails the Bushmen. Out of the pulp comes a white, bitter liquid, which not only quenches their thirst, but sustains them until they find better water. I have seen Bushmen in one of the worst droughts in memory, thin and near the end of their tether, with only this root to sustain them, and sustain them he did. Although the women had much less leisure than the men, when they had leisure, they loved to break up ostrich eggshells and out of the fragments made the most perfect beads by drilling holes, rounding the fragments, and then stringing them together into necklaces and even headbands. Suddenly, the games and the play were over. Kai Kukwe discovered that her first cycle of menstruation was upon her, and the whole day was transformed for everybody. The youngest girl was immediately sent home because this was the most important news that could be told in the life of woman. It made me remember how I've always felt that the Bushmen were rich. In a way, we were poor, because for all these traumatic experiences, they had a ritual to help the individual to come to terms with their evolution from the cradle to the grave. The mother took up her daughter and carried her back to the shelters. This in itself was symbolism, reenacted of the most significant kind. It was saying directly to this girl that you will not carry this transition from girlhood into womanhood alone. And from that moment on, it was most impressive how close the whole community gathered around this girl, how they took her into shelter, how they stayed with her, and how they accompanied her through all the phases of becoming a woman. And this element of sharing is present throughout all the ritual that follows. Even the appearance of the men with dry forked branches, like the horns of the gemsbuck, which is an immense symbol of masculinity and masculine power, is there to show that this world of men is from now on going to be present in the life of this young woman. The women reinforce the importance of the appearance of the men with the horns of the gemsbuck by presenting their naked behinds to the girl in a movement which the gemsbuck itself uses during the mating season. Finally, when her menstruation is over, they decorate her face with the marks, which resemble very strongly the marks of the gemsbok, this great symbol of fertility, masculine fertility. And she sits there at last fulfilled as a woman, with her eyes downcast, shy and afraid in case the new power which has entered her will take away power from the men whose world she will have to share in future. The Stone Age people have a very moving story to illustrate the importance of the event for them all. And the story is just this. At the end of the initiation ceremony in Stone Age days, the girl, bewildered as she was by what was happening to her, felt bitter, and she felt rather sad. And towards the end of the day, she would look at the fire dying down, and look at it as if the dying down fire was the dying down of her childhood, and the ashes were the ashes of her burnt-out childhood. And she would take up the ashes and the coals, and she would throw them up into the sky, and she would say to them, "You shall lie along the sky, and you shall gently glow through the ashes to light up the way for men and women in the dark, so that coming and going between the places where they are, they shall never lose the way. You shall be utterly the Milky Way until the end of all your days." And this, to me, was always one of the most important stories that I ever heard about the Bushmen, because it proved a frightfully vital element of all true human belief, and that is that if you can take your suffering and you can make it part of the universe, you can find a meaning in your suffering, then your suffering is no longer suffering. And this is what this girl was doing. She was putting the whole in the symbol of the story. She was putting her own experience in the processions of the stars, because she says, "You shall always be the Milky Way. You shall be utterly the Milky Way." And this is additionally significant because it shows that in the Bushman mind, as in the Greek mind, the Milky Way was also a feminine inspiration.